I know you'll be touching on this more during our interview, but I'm wondering if you can describe a little about how, if at all, your own personal meditation practice has informed your overall views on race and privilege.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the biggest thing there again is it's given me the opportunity to look at issues both personally, socially as an African American, without the same level of attachment that one might have without a spiritual tradition, a meditative
Hmm.
practice. And
Hmm.
that has been just essential because I would say before I got involved with this kind of practice, I certainly had and experienced a level of anger about the existence of racism in the society, the prevalence of systemic racism, the historical aspects of that. And all of those things I think are important, but to be able to approach those and to be able to talk about them, to be able to reflect on them within myself and to engage others with those issues with a degree of non-attachment, which again doesn't mean disengagement, is really, really important. And that's been one of the biggest things that my spiritual practice has brought to my understanding of both the personal and social impact of race and the issues we're dealing with today in terms of anti-racism training as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Next question, please excuse a bit of a short preamble to set the stage for those listeners who I want to make sure are with us here through these issues. If we go back into the Buddha's life, he taught many things in ancient India. But here in the West, in contemporary times, the primary emphasis from these teachings has been primarily on the formal meditation practice. These days, many of us are trying to figure out this appropriate balance between what our formal practice on the one hand and engaging with the affairs of the world on the other. This is nothing new from what spiritual practitioners have done through the ages. Of course, there's no guidebook for any of this, and so it's played out in different ways in different places. From my background, I know that within the Burmese monkhood over the centuries, some monasteries have argued for a greater role in social causes and concerns, while others have maintained the world outside their walls was really not part of their mission. In the United States, some retreat centers actively combine formal meditation with involvement in social issues, while others are more in line with the phrase render unto Caesar. And there's a distinct separation between church and state, as it were. So in your training, Clyde, I see that at one point you noted, quote, a long history exists of Dhamma students using Vipassana to aid them in their work in social and racial justice, end quote. I was quite intrigued myself when I saw this. And can you give our listeners an example or two that illustrates this?
Yes, and if I could, Joe, I'd even like to go back to the stories of the Buddha, because that's where I start. I mean, with the mythology there, and I think it's
Right.
their lovely stories. And if we remember, I mean, the young man had grown up inside a walled castle, but refused to stay in that walled castle and went outside in the world when his father tried to eliminate from his view death. And yet he saw people dying, and he said, "What is that?" He went out into the world and he saw people who were poor. What is that? And so I think that deep within the teachings of Buddha, of Buddha's tradition, is this sense that, yes, there may be a world outside the walls, but you don't ignore it. In fact, it was because of what the Buddha experienced outside the walls, the suffering, that this path beyond suffering really came into being. And so I always keep that in the back of my mind, that this was not a tradition that started inside the walls exclusively. It started because someone was brave enough to jump over the walls and to experience what was outside in the world.
Mhm.
We say in Vipassana is the art of living. It's not the art of living in the world we want, it's the art of living in the world that's in front of us. So having said that, what has been really important to me, for example, and I think this was much of a surprise to many of the people at the training, is to note, for example, that Martin Luther King Jr. speechwriter, my dear friend, my teacher, my mentor, the late Dr. Vincent Harding, the man who actually wrote King's 1967 Riverside Church, New York City speech, the Beyond Vietnam speech, the speech that probably more than anything marked King as someone who really had stepped outside of simply engagement with the causes of the South, but moving into the anti-war movement. Some people said set him up for his assassination later. But this powerful speech came from a man, again, Vincent Harding, who was a Vipassana meditator, who sat 10-day courses, who actually led his students to say, hey, I think you would really benefit from doing a 10-day sit. And some of them actually went on to do more than 10-day sits. And so
Wow.
when I look back at that, and again, Vincent was a dear friend during his life, someone who took me under his wings, and I learned about what it means to live a life that is also deeply spiritual, at the same time is deeply committed to social justice. So that to me is a really clear example, not just in general of using spirituality in terms of social justice, but specifically of Vipassana taught by S.N. Goenka in this case, as the basis for the spiritual underpinnings that allow you to continue the work that Vincent was doing in the world. And again, Vincent's work is just tremendous. To be the person who wrote the words that King delivered is, I think, speaks in a very beautiful way about what is possible when somebody has this spiritual teachings beneath them.